Spoiler alert, this is the end product. Stay tuned to see how we did it.
Okay, this here is the old dresser that we are going to be trying to redo. This was a piece of furniture that came, I believe, from Lowe's. It was a unfinished self-install kit. So it came in a box. You put it together and then you stain it and finish it ever how you like. So I don't think it was this dark when we first stained it. I'm not 100% sure. I believe it was definitely shinier as well. Long story short, we've got about 10, maybe 15 years worth of smoke built up on the outside of the finish. And we're going to see if we can get all of this off and refinish it enough to make it usable again. It's pretty much beat up from its life. You can see some of the scratches and the dings and the dents that have gotten into the top over the years. Same thing with the drawers. But I believe we can sand it down and actually get it back into a good piece. The nice thing is, because it was something that had to be assembled, it allows me to completely take it back apart into individual pieces to make it easier to basically finish, and I don't have to worry about joints and everything else. I can disassemble it into individual parts, scrape off whatever finish is there, and then refinish it. Okay, so the first thing we did was just pull all the drawers out. They became a separate part of the project, so the drawers just got sat to the side, and I came back and did all of those later, and then we started off doing just the base unit itself. So for starting out, like I said, we just pulled all the drawers out and sat those over to the side and came back to those at a later on part of the project. Okay, the door is held on by 4 screws, so I went ahead and just completely removed the door and sat it over to the side. I was going to do it separate with the drawers, but eventually I did decide to come back and do that, as you'll see here, as part of this build. Once those were out, we came back and tried to remove the backing material, the decorative. Well, I say decorative, but this actually serves the purpose of strengthening up the unit. Without this back on the unit, it does not hold up to any racking forces, side-to-side forces. So that's actually a big part of why that material is on the back of these cheap little units like this. This is basically just your typical paper board material. In this case, it has a white surface, so it looks a little bit more pretty and decorative on the inside. But it's, yeah, basically just your brown paperboard material that was held in with those itty-bitty little nails. When you're in presswood, these are usually very easy to remove simply by prying like we're doing here. They'll usually just pop right out, no problems. We did the same thing to her kitchen microwave cart, and yeah, the back unit just popped right off, no problem. With this being real wood all the way around, the nails that they use held very well. So as I'm sitting here trying to pull this up, the nails are just not coming out very easily. You'll see here one of them tore out. In fact, I think most of the ones before this one and this one right here, it just tore completely out no matter how much I tried to get the nail to let loose. And there was really no way of getting in on the top. There wasn't enough room to get anything underneath the nail to get it started. So I kind of had to go on the bottom and hope it would let loose, but it just didn't work out very well. Every so often one would work, but for the most part, they just tore completely out. And I fought with this, and like it seemed like it started working, and I'm like, okay, we'll come back and we'll just kind of clean it up. But eventually, to be honest, I just kind of finally gave up eventually, and we just pulled this thing off because it just wasn't worth fighting. So I just yanked it off, and we kind of had to go with a backup plan. As I was sitting here looking at it, I'm like, okay, exactly what am I going to do? How do I want to try to fix this? And eventually, at the end, I finally decided it's just not worth it. So we went ahead and just threw this away, and I wound up getting a different material to put it all back together later. Okay, at this point, we're back down to just the bare wood itself. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and just reverse the process of what we did. Okay, there's not a lot to really show you here, so I'm not going to make you watch this at regular speed. I believe this is 16 speed on this part of the video. Basically, this unit was completely held together with screws, dowels, and little pieces of angled metal that was screwed in. So all we did was go through and just systematically remove every screw out of the unit to get it down to the individual parts that made it up. Again, this came as a kit from Lowe's, so it was a completely assembled piece in the first place. So to take it apart, all we did was just reverse engineer and remove every single screw from the unit, and then just knock all of the parts apart to get it down to the individual boards to make it easier to sand. Once everything was disassembled, we started off with the smallest pieces first for the sanding. These were the sort of little runners that went on the front and back to kind of basically hold all the parts together. They're all about the same shape and size. I tried different ways of doing this. In fact, the last project we worked on was a chest of drawers, and for that project I used a belt sander. I learned real quickly that a belt sander just leaves too many grooves and patterns in the material. So we decided to switch over to the random orbital sander, and that was a lot better at sanding to make it pretty, for lack of a better word. That made it to where there was no patterns, and everything pretty much worked very well with that. So that, in my opinion, that is the best way of getting this material off. We thought about using chemicals and different things like that, but at the end of the day, for what I was trying to accomplish, I think the easiest way was to just sand it down and be done with it. I know a lot of people say you shouldn't wear gloves around tools because they can do things, but it was cold in the garage and my fingers were getting numb, so I had to find some way to kind of keep everything warm. One thing you'll see throughout this little section is that I'm fighting, trying to find ways to do more than one at a time. I tried a few different things, but the movement of the random orbital makes it where it basically throws stuff in different directions. So when you're doing very small pieces, it's kind of very hard to use a random orbital sander when you're doing small pieces of sanding work, because basically the way it throws the wood around, it just, if it were clamped, it would have been better. You'll see me try some homemade clamping ways, trying to find ways to hold them together and sit on them and everything else, but nothing really worked. And in the end, I finally just said, yeah, bump it, and just decided to hold each piece and then just go do each little piece individually. Okay, now let's get into the actual sanding of all the big pieces. So I went ahead and just started with the tabletop itself. This is the most important part. This is the majority of the spot you're going to see. So this is the one I want to kind of go ahead and start with, just to make sure that it went through without any kind of problems. One thing that's very interesting is you heard me mention earlier about the random orbital sander. As you can see here, the piece is just kind of sliding all over the place. The vibrations that thing puts out with a just wood on wood surface like I was trying to do this on made it a very challenging thing to do. For the edges, another thing, and this is sort of another thing learned in this project, on the chest of drawers side, the corners, trying to use the orbital sander on the sides did not work out very well. I wound up removing too much of the material so that you could see that it was actually affecting the look of the actual formed parts of the cut pieces. So I tried doing that by hand, but eventually it just did not work out well. And since this was just a rescue and this was something that I was doing just to get this back to Mom, I really wasn't that worried about it in the end. It's not like I was trying to do this as like a museum piece or anything. So we just wanted to get the smell out. So I went out going back to the orbital sander, even on the edge pieces, to get everything off. And one thing that we did, so we started off at I think it was an 80 grit, but especially on the pieces that were visible like this, we went through, I think it was from 80 to 120 to 180 to 220, and then I think finally to 320 was all of the grits that I went through. So we ended up with a 320 grit in the very end, just to make sure all the sanding marks were out and it was nice and smooth. And it actually worked out very well. Typical process using denatured alcohol just to kind of get all the dust off of everything. It also helps pull the grain out to see what everything looks like. Once the top was done, we basically got into all the other pieces as well. So going forward, it got a lot easier. Most of these are flat. All of these are just interior pieces for the most part. That one was a shelf in the center, so that one actually mattered. This piece here was an inside one that isn't seen, so it wasn't really as important, but we sanded everything down to the raw wood just to get it completely down to bare wood. One thing you'll notice is that this is basically a piece of pine furniture, and it's not a high-end piece. There are knots all over the place in the wood that they used. Totally served its purpose. Like I said, this thing is a fairly old unit now. The only reason we were really even restoring it is Mom loved it. The two bottom drawers were bigger than normal, and it had a little cubby hole that she could store some things that she actually liked, where the dresser that we had gotten her for the new apartment she moved into didn't have that. So she actually really wanted to get this one back. That's sort of the whole reason that we tried to rescue this piece in the first place. But yeah, all these pieces we kind of went through the same way. Just started off at the 80 and worked down through the grits. Basically used the 80 to get all the stain off, and then use the other grits to go through each level to get it smooth. So even the inside pieces that you couldn't see, I did go ahead and get those down. One interesting thing, earlier you saw that I mentioned that there was UV staining, or basically you could tell that the ultraviolet light, the sun had faded the wood. These inside pieces were never in the sun, so that they came out, I don't know if you can pick it up on video, but they actually got a little bit whiter than some of the other pieces that we were sanding, just because there was no fading. So these were completely protected from the sun throughout their life because they were inside the unit, and they came out basically very bright white compared to some of the exterior faces. So yeah, you could definitely tell that there was some UV fading over the years on this unit, but in the end, it actually turned out pretty well, we think. Starting on this piece, it got interesting. This is basically just the decorative foot plate in the front. Same thing, we started off just going through all the sandpaper on the front, all the surfaces, but when it got to the edges, there was just a lot of fine router detail in those things that was just hard to get to. Really doing it with the electric thing was just going to chew it up. So this is another thing that I did everything I could with the orbital sander, but then I pulled out the hand sandpaper. And what I'm using is actually a mesh sandpaper that you use for drywall work, for sanding drywall. I like this because since it's an open mesh and not an actual sandpaper, dust falls through it. It doesn't pick up a lot of dust. So that's why I went with that. Now, we had problems with it because it's getting into those crevices. It just would not get into the crevices as well as we would have liked. So starting with that piece, we actually stopped trying to get all the stain off. Again, it came back to hey, we're just trying to save this piece of furniture for Mom. I'm going to be staining it again, and I'm going to be staining it a darker color. Let's see how well we can stain over it with some of the old stain on. It's just a bottom footer plate, so we went ahead and did that. And in the end, I think you'll see that it works out rather well. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. Same thing on this door piece. Basically, those little small grooves just became impossible to get everything out of. Same thing on the sides. It was just so many little crevices on this thing, and it was real wood we could sand away, but it was just very hard to get all of the little crevices, all the little nooks and crannies completely stain free. So I just had to make the decision that it wasn't worth it. Again, if this was something I was making to sell or something, or a professional piece or whatever, I would have taken the time, but we were just trying to save this thing from the scrap heap. So we sanded off as much of the stain as I could. and the little crevices. I tried to get in there with the orbital, and we got some of it out, but it certainly wasn't perfect. And I think we'll be able to show this a little bit later on when we get into the staining part of it. So yeah, just to summarize, we went through all the pieces. We basically started from 80, went all the way down to 320 on every piece, used the denatured alcohol to kind of go through and get all the dust off of everything once it was done and kind of get an idea of what it looked like. And then once all the pieces were done, we basically carried it into the house and got ready for the staining. Once all the sanding was done, I was actually able to get out of the garage finally, which it was very cold, so that made me very happy. The stain and the polyurethane is something you don't really want to do out in freezing temperatures. So the dust that came off of that thing was some of the most horrible, smoky smelling dust you've ever seen. And the amount of material that we took off, it completely coated the inside of the garage. It looked like it had snowed in there. There was a coating of just that thick, dark dust all over everything. In fact, you may have noticed earlier I had a gas stove, little heater thing running in the background. Probably not the smartest idea, but I was cold, I needed a little bit of heat, and it didn't flare up and cause a dust fire, so it all worked out in the end. Anyway, once we got all the stuff completely sanded, we moved from the garage down to the basement. Here's a sort of a picture of all the pieces once everything was sanded down. As I was saying, in the piece on the end, the foot plate and the two side panels you see there in the middle, you can tell that there is some stain still left. But like I said, we reached a point we were not going to worry about that. I was just going to stain over it and see how well it worked out. Stain doesn't really absorb very well over old stain, but because what I was using was a fairly close but darker looking stain, I wanted to give it a shot. And again, not a museum piece, just trying to give Mom a functional dresser back that she just happened to like this thing and wanted to get it back. So that's all we were attempting here. I'm going to go ahead and cut this video off here just because it did get rather long. We'll go ahead and pick up another video for the actual staining and the reassembly process. So if you enjoyed this, then stay tuned for that next video. I know I said I was never going to do that, but hey, if you did actually like this, then hey, please hit the like button. If you like the channel, please subscribe. If you wanted to talk about it, leave a comment below. You know, there's all the usual social media, blah, blah, blah. I said I wasn't going to do it, but you know, hey, apparently if you don't tell people, they don't do it. So I figured I would go ahead and throw it in there. But yeah, any comments, throw them down there. Any things you can see that I could have done better, differently, please share as well. I don't know if I'll be doing any kind of trying to restore other pieces of furniture in the future. This was more of a necessity than something I actually was looking forward to doing. But at the same time, it was a little bit fun. So it might be something that I might try on some of the other stuff we've got laying around the house. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you later on. Okay, there's my homemade camera protection rig, otherwise known as the Redneck Special. A trash bag with a hole poked in it, so that should protect the camera while we're filming. So let's get to sanding. Yo.
Hey,
You may not want to breathe too heavy in here.
your mom just called. She got an email that she wasn't sure that it was legit or not. I told her I was pretty sure it was not, because she said it was from Time Warner wanting her to do something with her account within 24 hours. That to me sounded iffy, but then she told me that it was like online spectrum support at nc.rr.com.
Yeah,
And I said, well, if it was from Spectrum, it would either be from TWC or from Spectrum.com or something like that, and not from nc.rr.com, because there are no addresses with Roadrunner for Spectrum, because Spectrum and Roadrunner are two different things, and they wouldn't use a Roadrunner email address for their own support center. But she had forwarded it to you, to your TWC account, for you to look at, and I said, you would call her if what I said was any different. I was pretty sure you would say the same thing.
Yeah, that's what it
Right?
is.
I mean, as soon as she sent the email, I'm like, that's not real.
Yeah, it's probably a fake address anyway, like it probably doesn't even go anywhere.
But you know, wanted her to click stuff, and I said, even if they did want you to change something, they're not going to give you a time limit on it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have to do this.
Before, after.
Did you take a before-after photo?
Well,
Or where's your camera?
right there.
Oh,
And trust me, you're glad it's under a bag.
yeah, see? Is it like on?
That's just